the dog of the trial. It was a warm spring morning. The city of Seville was slowly waking up, like every day. The bustle of daily life began to fill its streets, with taxis, bicycles, trams, and pedestrians moving in rhythm with their routines. However, something unexpected was about to happen in the city's courthouse, something neither the most experienced lawyers nor the judge himself had anticipated. Courtroom number 3 was about to witness one of the most important trials of the year. A corporate fraud case involving one of the largest companies in Europe. The defendants were two high-profile businessmen, known for both their wealth and political power. Their future depended on the testimonies of key witnesses and the evidence each side had gathered. Judge Hugo Sanchez sat in his solid oak chair, surrounded by his trusted staff, adjusting his half-moon glasses. With a stern look, he scanned the papers on his desk. He had been working in the court for over 40 years and had faced complicated cases, but something about this trial unsettled him. Perhaps it was the scale of the case, or the power the defendants represented. The truth was, it was rare for anything to bewilder him this much. The room was full. The defendants stood at the bar, dressed in perfectly tailored suits. Beside them, their lawyers, with serious faces, whispered quietly while the key witnesses waited their turn to testify. The atmosphere was charged with tension. The murmurs among the crowd, the distrustful glances, and the formality of the court only heightened the anticipation. Everything seemed under control, or at least that's what it seemed. It was at that precise moment when an unexpected figure barged into the room. The back door slowly opened, and a street dog, with dirty fur and a bewildering look, limped in. The room fell into complete silence. At first, no one moved, as if everyone was processing what they had just seen. It was a dog, but not just any dog. This one had a visible wound on one of its hind legs, and although it walked with difficulty, its eyes reflected an unwavering determination. The dog moved through the room, dodging empty benches with the grace of someone who already knew the place. No one could understand how it had gotten there, much less how it had managed to enter without being stopped by security guards. Some of the people present tried to call security, but the dog was already too close. Judge Sanchez, initially bewildered, couldn't help but look at the animal. Something in its presence, so chaotic and senseless, seemed to have an unmistakable urgency. In the years he had worked in courts, he had never witnessed anything like this. The dog stopped in front of the bar, staring at the judge intently. A strange feeling swept through the room, a mix of confusion and curiosity. It was then that the dog, without warning, lifted its head and began to bark. The sound echoed through the room with a disconcerting clarity. Woof! The first bark was brief, but full of strength. All eyes turned toward it, with surprise and astonishment. No one moved, and time seemed to stand still. The dog lifted its head once again, and at that moment, its eyes shone with something indescribable, as if it understood that its message needed to be heard. Without waiting any longer, it barked again. Woof! Woof! The witnesses, the lawyers, and even the defendants stood frozen. There was no logic behind what was happening. Judge Sanchez, for his part, furrowed his brow, unsure of how to react. Something deep within him told him he couldn't ignore this. The dog wasn't barking at random. There was a purpose behind those sounds. The third and final bark was even louder, more resonant, like an echo reverberating through every corner of the room. Woof! 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 With that final bark, the dog turned around and limped slowly toward the door through which it had entered. The silence remained, but it was no longer the same silence. The atmosphere had changed. No one knew what it meant, but everyone felt that something profound had happened. Judge Sanchez didn't know what to do. There was something in those barks, something in the silent language of that wounded dog, that had touched him more deeply than any testimony or evidence ever could. The dog had interrupted the trial in a way no one could have predicted. The minutes that followed were tense. Some tried to continue with the trial, but there was an odd air in the room, a feeling that something more important had occurred. The judge, unable to ignore it, called for an immediate recess. During the recess, the lawyers and witnesses gathered in small groups, discussing what had happened, but no one seemed to find an answer. However, everyone felt uneasy. No one in the room could shake the image of the dog, with its wounded paw, staring at the judge with those intense eyes. Meanwhile, the dog, after leaving the courthouse, wandered the streets of the city as if its mission had been completed. No one knew where it had come from or where it was going, but its presence had marked a before and after in the trial. Judge Sanchez, upon returning to the courtroom, felt an inner pressure. What had that dog meant to say? Why had it barged in like that? Was the fate of the defendants beyond human hands? That afternoon, when the trial resumed, something had changed. The lawyers, the witnesses, and even the defendants seemed less sure, as if the room itself had reminded them of something greater, beyond their own ambitions and desires. And so, the trial continued, but no one forgot the dog that interrupted the courtroom, and even less so the impact it had on the judge, who, with a more reflective gaze, understood that sometimes the deepest truths are not always spoken with words.